Rome did not send its legions to Anglesey because the Druids were dangerous warriors. Rome had already defeated warriors far more formidable. It sent its legions because the Druids carried something no empire can tolerate, a form of knowing that could not be conquered, catalogued, or controlled. They trained for 20 years to hold it, they refused to write it down. And when Rome finally crossed that strait, what it burned was not a religion, it was a frequency, one that still exists, one you recognize. Welcome to Power and Myth. To understand what happened on the shores of Anglesey in 60 AD, you must first understand what Rome actually was, not the marble civilization of popular imagination. Rome was a system, a machine of integration. Every territory it absorbed was folded into its architecture, local gods renamed, local leaders appointed as proxies, local customs permitted so long as they served Roman order. Rome did not need to erase cultures, it needed to metabolize them, and for most of the ancient world this worked. Gaul submitted, Hispania submitted, Greece had already been absorbed intellectually before the legions arrived. The pattern was efficient and almost universally successful. Almost, because in the dense oak groves of Britain and Gaul, Rome encountered something its system could not process. The Druids were not priests in any sense that Rome understood. They held no temples, they kept no written scriptures, they did not answer to a centralized religious authority. What they held was a living knowledge tradition that existed entirely in human memory and human perception. Pliny the Elder recorded their botanical expertise, their understanding of medicinal plants that Roman physicians could not replicate. Julius Caesar, in his Commentari de Bello Gallico, noted that Druidic training lasted up to 20 years, and that Druids served as judges, educators, astronomers, and counselors to kings. They were consulted before battles. They mediated disputes between tribes. They performed the rites that the Celtic world believed held the cosmos in balance. But here is what mattered most to Rome, and what history has insufficiently emphasized. The Druids did not simply advise. They perceived. Their function in Celtic society was not administrative, it was cognitive. They were trained to see patterns that others could not see, to read the movement beneath the surface of events, to hold complexity without reducing it. Strabo described them as natural philosophers. Diodorus Siculus called them prophets. The Celtic tribes themselves understood them as those who could see the shape of what was coming, and this was precisely the problem. Rome could offer a conquered people roads, aqueducts, citizenship, and legal systems. What it could not offer was a replacement for a class of people whose authority came not from position but from perception. You cannot make a Druid a Roman proxy. Their power did not flow from institution. It flowed from a way of seeing. Suetonius Paulinus, the Roman governor who ordered the final assault on Anglesey, was not a fool. He understood that military resistance in Britain would continue as long as the Druids maintained the tribe's psychological and spiritual coherence. Tacitus recorded the scene on the shore, the Druids standing amongst the warriors, arms raised, voices calling down what the Romans believed were curses. The Roman soldiers hesitated. Hardened legionaries who had marched across continents stood at the water's edge and could not move, not because of superstition, because they recognized, on some level beneath strategy, that they were facing a kind of power their system had no answer for. They crossed eventually, they burned the groves, they killed the Druids they could find. Within a generation, the knowledge tradition that had taken millennia to develop was effectively destroyed, not because it was weak, because it was too dangerous to be permitted. What Rome eliminated was not a rival army, it was a rival way of knowing. And this is where the history stops being history, because the pattern Rome could not tolerate did not die on Anglesey. It is a pattern that recurs across generations and in every system that prizes control over depth. And you, sitting here, recognize it, not because you have read about it, because you have lived it. What the Druids embodied, that capacity to perceive beneath the surface, to hold patterns others cannot hold, to know things before the evidence arrives, to carry a form of intelligence that no institution grants and no institution can contain. This is not a metaphor for your experience. This is your experience, named in its oldest form. What the Celtic world called the Druid, what the classical historians called the Seer, Carl Jung understood as a specific cognitive architecture. He called it introverted intuition. Nigh-dominant cognition, the capacity of the unconscious mind to process vast quantities of data beneath awareness and surface a completed pattern. Not mysticism, not magic, a measurable, describable way the psyche organizes reality, and those who carry it, those whose dominant function is this deep, pattern-completing perception, are the ones Jung's framework identifies most precisely as the INFJ. You are the seer, not by choice, by inheritance. The Druids trained for 20 years to develop what you carry as your default mode of consciousness. That sense of knowing without being able to explain the route of your knowing. That experience of walking into a room and reading its emotional architecture before a single word is spoken. That exhausting, isolating, profoundly disorienting capacity to perceive what is coming before it arrives. This is knee-dominant cognition operating at full capacity. And just as Rome could not tolerate it in the Druids, modern systems cannot quite tolerate it in you. Consider how many times your perception has been met, not with gratitude, but with suspicion. How many times you have seen what was coming and been told you were overthinking. How many times your pattern recognition has been dismissed as anxiety, as paranoia, as excessive sensitivity. The charge has never changed. It is the same charge Rome levelled at the Druids. You perceive things that make the system uncomfortable. The shadow of this inheritance is real and must be named. The Druids were destroyed not only because they could see, they were destroyed because they could not stop seeing. Their perception was not a skill they could set aside when it became politically inconvenient. It was who they were. And this is your shadow too. The seer's wound is not blindness. It is the inability to unsee. You carry the weight of every pattern you have ever perceived, including the ones no one wanted you to notice, including the ones that cost you relationships, positions, and belonging. Jung called this the archetype of the wounded healer, Chiron, the centaur who could heal every wound except his own. Your capacity to perceive is inseparable from your capacity to be wounded by what you perceive. And the systems around you, the workplaces, the social structures, the families, often respond to your seeing the way Rome responded to the Druids. Not with engagement, with suppression. What the Druids understood, and what you are learning, is that the seer's power does not require the system's permission. The groves burned, but the pattern did not die. It could not die because it was never stored in a text or a temple. It was stored in the structure of consciousness itself, in the collective unconscious, in the inherited architecture of a psyche that processes reality through depth rather than surface. Jung understood this. The archetypes are not cultural artifacts. They are psychological structures that recur across every civilization because they are built into the human mind. The seer recurs because the seer is needed. Every generation produces those who can see beneath the surface. Every system attempts to manage them, and every time the pattern survives. You are not an anomaly. You are not a personality type that happens to feel things too deeply. You are the continuation of the oldest recognized pattern of human perception. The Druids did not choose their role. They were identified, selected, and trained because the capacity was already in them. You were not trained. No one identified what you carried. No one gave you a 20-year apprenticeship in how to hold what you see. And yet you hold it every day, often alone, often without language for what you are doing. This is what power and myth exist to change. Not to fix you, you are not broken, to name you, to place you in the lineage you belong to, so that the weight you carry has context, has history, has meaning beyond the personal. The Druids are gone. But the pattern they served is sitting at a screen watching this video, recognizing itself in every sentence, wondering how it is possible that a history this old could describe a Tuesday afternoon this accurately. It is possible because you are not learning about the Druids, you are meeting your own reflection in the historical record. If this video changed how you understand what you carry, please tell me in the comments. When did you first realise that your way of seeing was not a flaw but a function? When did you first sense that what others called overthinking was something far older and far more precise? Subscribe to Power and Myth, where we keep naming what has always been true. Share this with someone who needs to know their perception is not a disorder, it is a lineage. Until next time, find your power, know your myth.